enter into our African Mirror section of the show, and we will continue the conversation on the arrival or the re-arrival of the Orange Man and what looks like to be a Republican majority in United States government. Having a look at how it's going to affect us on the continent is Thelma Nyarhi, researcher at the Democracy Development Program at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thelma, welcome to African Mirror on Newsbeat.
Thank you for having me, and good day to the listeners.
I'm sure you have been watching with a very beady eye what's been happening in the United States. So, first off the bat, in Africa, how should we be seeing the a re-arrival of Donald Trump?
I mean, to start off, I think it's important that I state this. It's quite difficult to separate Trump's bluster from his actual plans, particularly when he now takes on power in January. But at the same time, when we look at Africa, or rather his relationship with Africa, it's quite essential that we also try to map out the actual interests of the separate regions within Africa. You'd find that within the West, it's a matter of peace and security. Within the southern parts, it's a matter of the economy. And we'll see this with the AGOA project and how the Twitter, or rather X, has been booming with congratulation messages from presidents within the South. So we already see that the intended relationship is one that mirrors a good trading relationship, but also it questions the kind of tariffs that may be potentially applied. Secondly, or rather thirdly, it's also about looking at the East, and with the East region, African region, it's also a matter of peace and security, but also potentially aid also being something of interest. But when we go back to what he has been speaking to when it came to his rallies, in as much as he hasn't necessarily touched on foreign policy quite directly, he has been hinting on particular things or steps that he hopes to put across. So one being, the increment of tariffs with more focus on more tariffs or increased tariffs on China, because one of his major goals is ideally to curb Chinese influence when it comes to trade.
Yeah, that's going to be a big ask, isn't it? Because as I've been saying to previous analysts, we've got the short term, the medium term, and the long term. In the short term, he might win what I would call emotional victories. But as we go to the medium term, I'm beginning to wonder how Americans who are worried about the economy are going to respond when they go to their shops and certain items are not on the shelves because they've been tariffed out of existence by Trump, when Americans realize how many Chinese products they actually are reliant upon.
Exactly. And he has been badgering on this point of, tackling a huge range of domestic issues, which, as you mentioned, inflation, as well as immigration. And that's where he's been gaining his emotional support, or rather his primary response in terms of where voting is concerned. But now when we look at midterm, activities or long-term effects, it might be difficult, particularly when we look at trade, because for him, it's a matter of increasing the tariffs, and that in a sense, and also putting America first, which already hints on this idea of isolating as a state when it comes to global issues. It's a matter of isolating. It's a matter of putting the state first. It's a matter of even shunning this idea of multilateralism, which might not be a good thing when it comes to the AGOA project. So with the AGOA project, which as an abbreviation stands for African Growth and Opportunity Act, houses many African states who ideally have benefited in the free tariff or duty-free interest when it comes to trading. But now, considering Trump's idea of, putting America first, and ideally hinting on isolating, hinting on not necessarily picking on multilateralism, it also puts that whole idea or act into question, because you might just be more interested in bilateral relationships which actually serve America, as opposed to regional interests where it's under the AGOA project. So the future of the project, which unfortunately is supposed to be expiring in 2025, the future of it is quite dim. We're not quite sure whether it might continue or it might not continue. But there's possibilities, though, that it might not continue, considering the whole mantra of America first.
Obviously, and again, here are some major pitfalls for Trump, because if he does increase tariffs, and we know that he is going to do it, and I predict it's going to be pretty much ad hoc, with China being given most of the burden. Apart from the fact that Americans will see products shrinking on their shelves, it's a paradox, it's a contradiction in terms, because if your tariffs become too expensive, people are going to take their business elsewhere. So that, theoretically speaking, it might not lead to an increase in trade, because people are not going to do business with you if there's so much tax.
Exactly. So the poor man is the one who suffers the most, more than anything. But in-house traders within the U.S. might benefit from this. But when it comes to the normal person, the normal mere person within the streets, they might suffer the most, considering the whole, loss of those necessary products. Again, looking at trade, I think with the AGOA project, particularly if we look at SA, South Africa, in as much as, yes, it might be a big knock in terms of trade for the sub-Saharan region, when we really zone in on South Africa, it's not necessarily a loss, considering the fact that, or rather using the projected estimates that only see possibly a drop in the GDP of 2.7%. So it's not really much. It won't necessarily put a knock to our economy. But with other sub-Saharan countries who ideally benefit a lot when it comes to those exports, them particularly, they might suffer the most when it comes to this.
There's another thing which I don't think the Trump regime has thought through clearly enough, and that is no problem with trying to encourage U.S. manufacturing. It's a logical thing for any country to do. But I wonder whether they've thought about the costs of American manufacturers as compared to the costs of the Chinese and those from the Far East, and even from those from Africa, that Americans might start complaining because local produce is going to cost so much more than goods coming in from other countries where there are these tariff discounts, as it were.
Exactly. And on top of that, it's also a matter of looking into resources themselves. Do they actually have the natural resources? I mean, Africa has been the place to actually get those natural resources in a more beneficial or affordable, if I may say, price. So it really wouldn't work in their favor, looking at those production costs.
Something that is interesting is that the government recently visited the U.S. There have been talks, and we don't know what's been happening in what they call the diplomatic back channels. Ramaphosa was very quick off the mark to send a message of congratulations to Trump, which is very good diplomatic protocol. But significantly, on the back of ministers visiting the United States, we see the redeployment of Ebrahim Rasool to the United States, who in his first tenure as ambassador was highly thought of. Not only by South Africans, but by Americans as well. How strategic do you think that is?
I mean, at the end of the day, going back again to this idea of moving towards a more bilateral kind of like relationship, it could literally just be that. It's a matter of, at the end of the day, what am I benefiting more out of this relationship? And if it's a matter of having higher benefits as opposed to the opposite or the polar, then ideally the relationship would work. So it could be strategic in that manner, of rather just building onto this idea of building more benefits for the United States more than anything.
Yeah, though one has to add that the present ambassador has not impressed by their competence as an ambassador in the United States, which is a very important diplomatic posting. One can actually understand that. So could there even have been the possibility that in Washington people were getting sick and tired of an incompetent ambassador?
Will be that. Again, it's a matter of what other people say.
Right.
It's always about that.
No.
So much change when it comes to elections this year.
No, absolutely. And of course, I mean, Thelma, we are chatting against the background of elections around the world, many elections. We've seen what's happened in Mozambique. We've discussed that. We've seen Botswana, their majority party losing power after 58 years, ANC losing majority after more than 30 years, and so it goes. So we're looking at, I would say, you can agree or disagree with me, tectonic shifts politically.
Oh, yes, definitely. And as Trump had said, it's a moment of having serious shifts when it comes to policies. So ideally, it seems like even the world order is following suit.
And would you advise caution going forward? You did say at the beginning it's quite difficult to differentiate between the bluster of Trump, where he starts using all these huge adjectives, as opposed to what will actually be the actions. Do you think, in terms of Africa, he's not going to have much focus on us until one morning he's going to wake up and say, there's Africa, and he's going to start moving. But in the meantime, we're going to be seeing things directed against immigrants and internal affairs of the U.S. as opposed to foreign affairs?
No, definitely. It's quite essential that we stay vigilant. Considering immigration plans, immigration policy plans are ones that don't favor immigrants. And we do know that as a continent, most of the economic labor ideally benefits from migration more than anything. So it's already problematic in that sense. But it's always important to be vigilant, as well as to ideally what are the interests. And also with any policy matter, always question, is it a matter of benefiting United States? If it's benefiting United States, then likely it might fall in favor. But if it's not, then the polar would literally result. So it's very important that we stay vigilant and stay suspicious as well, skeptical of everything.
Yeah, as journalists, we have to remain permanently suspicious. Thelma Nyarhi, researcher at the Democracy Development Program at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As always, thanks for joining us on African Mirror on Newsbeat. It's been an absolute